Okay, today we are learning letter number 19. This letter is really a combination of two separate letters which the Alter Rebbe wrote, and they were put together by his descendants, his sons, because they both speak about a common theme, which is how we go from an infinite Hashem down into a physical object. This is a core point which the Baal Shem Tov addressed with the concept that we have discussed so many times, known as non-literal tzimtzum. Meaning, if Hashem is infinite, how come I seem to exist and other matter seems to exist? And our explanation is because God withholds the overwhelming expression of himself while still being within this physical world. So we could just dismiss this as, okay, that's the answer. Now let's move on. However, in our endless pursuit of trying to know Hashem, not just to believe in Hashem, but to actually have personal, innate, sensitive, meaningful connection, there is a value in understanding the process through which Hashem does this. And this is what combines these two letters, because they both address this idea. So a little sort of background or basic introduction. There's an old saying here that build a better mousetrap and the world will be a path to your door. In other words, in our broader public society, we have a tendency to only value stuff that is practical. Why should we have a space program? Because that's how you develop a GPS system. Oh, okay. Meaning we validate intellectual pursuits because of their pragmatic consequence. Otherwise, we often dismiss it as a whole bunch of hooey and, who cares? And it's a bunch of late night college dorm discussion and so on. However, historically, maybe because they didn't have as many things, there was a greater appreciation for just the art of academic idea. I mean, people used to gift poems for weddings because they didn't have toasters and microwaves and registries and so on. So there is a great value to simply being in awe of and understanding and exploring the sort of more pure or non-purpose driven wisdom. And this is essentially captured in two terms, which we're going to come across a lot in this letter. The Hebrew phrase is Pnimius HaChachma and Chitzenius HaChachma. Translation, the essential concept and the pragmatic expression of the concept. And as we move down the chain, there is the added value that we now have a pragmatic understanding. We have a deeper understanding. So if I'm speaking about math or science or even philosophy in some abstract, it is infinitely applicable. And then as I start to apply math to engineering and how we build airplanes, and philosophy to political implementation and how we develop communities, we on the one hand have to chip away at I'll call it the purity of the concept, while maintaining or gaining a practical appreciation for what it is that we're talking about. I truly start to understand the math when I see how it results in construction. I truly understand the philosophy when I see how it starts to result in political policies and philosophies and so forth. So wisdom that is filtered down through the analysis of an eye for the practical takes on the shades of the interpreter. And that's what's entrusted to us when it comes to Torah. Hashem allows us, in fact, requires us to have our portion in Torah. That's why the Talmud is filled with, and then this one said, and that one said. Meaning, why do we think that we are entitled to have an opinion? Because on the contrary, Hashem filters it down through it. Now, this chapter is going to begin with a lot of that discussion and contrast of Hasidus versus how we study law, etc. However, or I should say, as an introduction to this, I want to share a chart with a couple of vocabulary words and also a visual illustration that hopefully will make it a little easier. So here's a bunch of vocabulary words which we are going to use throughout this chapter. One is arich anpin, which translates literally as long face. And that starts from, I'm going to translate all these words, from the concept of the crown all the way through action. Now, what does this mean? So down here, I found this online somewhere. We have the spheres. These are all concepts which we have discussed many times. Now, you'll note that there's only 10 and there's not das. Das is usually around here. So again, I don't know if it's the perfect chart and so on, but these are terms that we're hopefully familiar with. On the very top is what's called keser. The word keser is the crown. The crown is that which dictates everything. The king wears a crown to remind him that he is subservient to something greater than himself. The crown is the embodiment of his kingdom, of his personal family. Nobody else wears the crown. Now, the greatest goal is to get the crown all the way down to the implementation, which is malchus. So malchus, which comes from the word melech, or a king, we don't have really a word in English for this, which is the act of kinging. You know, presidents preside, governors govern. If we had a verb, an action for king. So on the one hand, the king is the above the people. On the other hand, what is a king's primary goal? What does he do most of the time? He does very basic stuff, you know, stop signs and taxes and so on. So the goal, the greatest goal, is to get Keser, our highest ideal, all the way down to Malchus. And we've used this analogy before. We might say that in this country, our Keser is all men are created equal. That is our greatest value. And, you know, we're imperfect, but our goal is that we should get that all the way down to Malchus. So everybody is protected by the Constitution and has a right to a speedy trial and has to stop at stop signs, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is, at least, again, conceptually, that's the Keser. Practically, we hope it to be the Malchus. And it trickles down through all of these different steps. Now, generally speaking, this is a little bit outside of what we're going to be discussing in this letter, but just to finish the idea, we never really get Keser all the way down to Malchus. It's never going to be a perfect, seamless, frictionless, high fidelity manifestation from the top all the way to the bottom. It's not likely to do that. We hope to get it as far down as we can. Okay, so now back up over here. We're going to use a phrase, arich anpin. The translation is a long face. And that's what we hope to achieve to get the crown, our highest ideal, all the way down into a behavioral. Because it's one thing to have an ideal, a concept, and it's a far greater challenge to manifest that concept in pragmatic behavior. That is its own kind of challenge. Now, some other words we're going to be talking about. Abba, which father. Father is the characteristic of Chachma. Just as I like the word imagination, but it's unformed. Just as in the development of a child, the father's contribution is unformed, and it manifests itself in the mother, Bina. So too, an idea in imagination is unformed until it is manifest in the Bina analysis all the way down into this physical world. So to go from Chachma to Bina, then into the 6 midos. So again, we're skipping das here. I don't want to get distracted by that. We have the 6 measurables. Okay, you recognize hopefully all these words. Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, and you see how they're laid out like an inverted triangle. And there's a right side and a left side. These are all ideas which I hope are familiar to everybody. So the 6 expressive midos are called the short face, Zeir Anpin, because they're not yet expressed. It's like, I'm a nice person doesn't mean I'm doing something nice right now. So it's short, it's not expressed, it's not externalized, it's not implemented. It's there, but it's not implemented. And the classic example of that is Abraham Avinu sitting by the tent, yearning to do kindness, but not acting on kindness until the travelers come along. So this is called the short face, the non-expressive. If you add Malchus all the way down here, you get the long face. You get it expressed. So again, the midos alone are called the short face, and the expressive is called, or is when they're manifest in Malchus. You take it all the way down. So again, just to use a simple analogy, if we believe that all men are created equal, then we have to jury it intellectually and manifest it until it's implemented. And yes, we in fact require everyone to stop at stop signs, and everyone's entitled to a speedy trial, whatever it is, all the different ideas. Hopefully everyone gets the point here. So again, the spheroids in the interface between them, from Chachma to Bina to the Midos into the Malchus, from the conceptual into the character, into the behavioral. Think it, feel it, do it. So again, these are ideas that we have come across many times before. Hopefully this little introduction will get us some vocabulary words that we're going to be coming across from time to time. So here we go. We begin with the quote. It comes from Tehillim in chapter 104. And although the Alter Rebbe begins this letter with this quote, we don't really go back to this quote very much. We rather are using it much more to focus on one particular word and as a sort of a Kickstarter for the conversation. But this letter will not be much of an analysis of this specific quote. The quote is, Ota or Kasalma v'goyma. The full quote is, Ota or Kasalma noita shemayim kayeria, which translates, you enwrap yourself with light like a garment. And that's really the point which the Alter Rebbe is going to emphasize about the comparison of light to a garment. And in Chabad, when we put on our talis in the morning, we say this pasuk because this is kind of the concept of the talis, that we enwrap ourselves with the garment, the talis, like light. You extend the heavens like a curtain. That's the full quote. You enwrap yourself with light like a garment. You, a reference to Hashem, extend the heavens like a curtain. Hine, b'lekutei Torah shahal Arizal. Now, there's a sefer called Lekutei Torah from the Arizal. It's not clear whether the Arizal wrote this or was written by his students. Arizal, again, 1600s in Sfas or Isaac Luria. Parshas Kisisa or Parshas Vayikra, this week's Parsha, Kosef, he writes, Ki asagas Moshe Rabbeinu olav hashalom lo haisa bebechinas penimius the chachmi ilah hanikra abba da'atzilis. Now he writes there that the comprehension of Moshe Rabbeinu, okay, top of the heap here, the comprehension of Moshe Rabbeinu was not at the level of penimius. Remember, we talked about that word penimius, and the translation is like the inner, that's the essence. But what it means here is the conceptual idea. Remember, rather than the implementation of engineering, it's just speaking about almost like theoretical math, or rather than the implementation of public policy, it's theoretical society, it's theoretical roles of government and so forth, rather than making a GPS system. It's the theoretical concept of space exploration, which is called, so Moshe Rabbeinu was not at that level. He was not at that level. That is called Abba Da'atzilis. That is called Father. Again, Father meaning Chachma of Atzilis. And again, you recognize hopefully these words, which are the four primary stages of awareness. Atzilis, we call it the worlds. Atzilis is the loftiest, the most intense level of awareness of Hashem. So Chachma being at the top of that level. And here we say that Moshe Rabbeinu's level of comprehension was not at that level of Abba of Atzilus. Again, I know it's a lot of lingo, but I hope everybody understands. And if you don't get exactly the stage, that's not going to prevent you from understanding this letter. But what is sort of noteworthy here is that we're putting a limit on Moshe Rabbeinu's degree of comprehension. There is a limit here to what Moshe Rabbeinu is able to reach. But Kol Shekain, and therefore certainly, if Moshe couldn't even reach the level of Chachma, of Atzilus, B'Sfiras HaKeser, he certainly couldn't reach the level of Keser. Remember Keser, the term crown, like the crown sits on top of the head. So it is higher, more personal than the characteristic of Chachma. So it's higher or more intensely personal, whatever we're going to describe it as. That is even higher, and again, higher, lower is maybe not the way we would use it. We might say more intensely personal or private than expressive. That is called Orech Anpin, the long face, which is again Keser, all the way down to behavior. So we are putting a limitation. This is a quote from Likutei Arizal, the collection of teachings of the Arizal. I didn't mention this before. It was written by his student, Reb Chaim Vital, who we mentioned many times here. Ki'im, what did Moshe Rabbeinu reach? Bebechinas acharayim de Chachma, only the external side of Chachma. And again, remember, external is, I'm going to use the word pragmatic, the way in which it expresses itself, the way in which it manifests itself. So it's engineering versus theoretical math. It's medicine versus theoretical science, and so on. So there's a certain diminished quality about it. Hamlubeshes bebina, the manner in which it is able to invest itself in bina. So here is another characteristic of the spheres. And as the great sage once described it, it's like the itsy bitsy spider. Now, if you recall, I mean, I know I'm being silly, but went up the water spout. That is, the lowest level of Chachma becomes the highest, and again, lower and higher, the most expressive level of Chachma becomes the most internal level, the most intense level of the degree beneath it, of Bina. So as we move down the chain, and again, our goal ultimately is to go from the infinite down to the implemented and hopefully never lose that stream. I mean, the difference between the successful company and the unsuccessful company is not how smart the CEO is, it's how far down the CEO can get his message into the $12 an hour greeter at the front door. So how far does Kesser come all the way down to Malchus? So at each stage, the lowest or the most expressive degree of that stage becomes the most intense, the most personalized level of the stage below it. So the acharayim, the expressive stage of Chachma, of the wild-eyed, infinite imagination, becomes the most intensely personal level of the second stage of the analytics of Bina. So Chachma becomes Bina at that level, okay? And again, our ultimate goal is to have it expressed into the character. So we have a tendency to almost bifurcate the two. We have the detached academics, even in the world of Torah. We have the people who study the academic side, and then we have the pragmatic side. And the two don't always mix. I mean, it's sort of the difference between the Rosh Yeshiva, who in a yeshiva setting is much more about the conceptual, and you have the Rav who is determining whether this cow is kosher and this mezuzah is written properly and so on, which is much more pragmatic. And the two are not always complementary characteristics. One is more what we would call theoretical, and the other is more practical. Now, again, we're not such rigidly binary people that we're only one and not the other, but there's a certain emphasis and a certain strength and a certain character trait and a certain life experience that leads one to being more like that than the other. So here, the goal is, again, to trickle down, using this sort of analogy, that as the concept makes its way down from Chachma, it starts to become manifest in Bina and so on. But again, the main point of entry to this discussion is this quote from the Arizal that Moshe Rabbeinu, pretty high-level guy, could not reach past the acharayim, the pragmatic side of Chachma. And here the Alter Rebbe says, where do we find the full-on emphasis of Hashem, Soid HaTorah? Now, this concept here, the foundation or the secret, not secret as in I have a secret, but it's like the core, like the secret sauce. What is the essence of it? Like they say, what is the secret of Chabad? Say secret, they can't wait to tell you. They're not keeping it a secret, Rabbi Friedman says, we say wherever you go in the world, there's Coke and Chabad. The difference is Coke is successful because they don't tell you how they make it. And Chabad is successful because they can't stop telling you how they make it. So when we say soid as a secret, we don't mean a secretive, we mean the essence. Now herein, at this point, really lies one of those essential differences of emphasis of Chassidus. Everyone here is familiar that when the Alter Rebbe wrote Tanya, not everybody was so down with it. And even to this day, there's a lot of like, what is this thing? And they really don't sort of get it as to what is this thing with Chassidus. What is a fundamental difference? And this is something that we have talked about many times. Where do we put the ultimate emphasis? Again, it's not one to the elimination of the other, but where is the ultimate emphasis? Is it in what I'm calling sort of the detached, conceptual, almost the poetic, academic side of Torah? Or is it in how it manifests itself into the absolute directives of Torah? And again, nobody is saying one and not the other, but where do we put our ultimate value? Is it in the conceptual idea, or is it in the practical implementation of that idea? Or a way of summarizing it, you'll recognize these two quotes. One is Talmud Torah, the study of Torah, Keneged Kula, outweighs everything. And another from Pirkei Avos, both of these are Mishnahs, that it is not the discussion that is primary, it is the action that is primary. Or the way the Rebbe summarized it, and if we did a word search, probably the quote most often implemented by the Rebbe is Hamaisa Hua Ikar. The deed is the primary. And again, not primary to the elimination of the academic, and it's not academic to the elimination, but where do we put the emphasis? And this line here, the Alter Rebbe says that the manifestation of the expression of the Chacham into the Bina, into the seven spheros, all the way down, is the Soid HaTorah. That is the foundation of Torah. Now, this also will give us insight into why there is often so much dispute in Torah. Meaning you have Hillel and Shammai, just to use one analogy, and there's many, many of these in the Talmud. You have common pairs that they often disagree. I mean, again, they're not Hatfields and McCoys, something that like each other, but they often disagree. Hillel and Shammai are a classic illustration, but there's numerous ones. And you think, well, here are two people, they're both equally smart, they both have access to the same data. How come they look at it and they see it differently? And they argue back and forth and they don't come to a resolution. And Chassidus explains, because their neshamas are programmed differently. And as much as we like to imagine that we are perfectly objective, No, but you can't be perfectly objective. Even if you've had two identical upbringings, you can't be perfectly objective because we have a character, a personality to our neshama. And that is going to manifest it. As we say, just using the Hillel Shammai example, because it's one that we're familiar with, that Hillel, his neshama came from chesed. And therefore, it was his tendency to be more lenient. Now, if you would ask him, why are you ruling leniently in this example, in this case, he's not going to say, well, because I'm a nice guy. He would say some academic explanation. But why does the academic explanation lead him to this conclusion when his partner, Shammai, has the same information and the same intelligence and the same commitment to finding the MS, and his conclusion is to be restrictive? And our answer is, it's not about academics, it's about the core of their character, that Shammai comes from Gevura, and again, not mean, but from being more precise, and Hillel comes from Chesed. So again, all of this goes into the pragmatic. That's why the intellect passes through the character into the behavior. And we're not just trying to short circuit the character and just say, well, just be academic about it. Just be sort of cold-blooded about it. So here we say, that this process that starts in the Keser and processes through the academic of the intellect, and then comes down into the conceptual midos, like Chesed and Gevura, and then into what we call the bottom four. So if you remember from the chart, I could put it back up if that would be helpful. From the chart, the bottom four midos are the manifestation. So you see, Netzach, which is like endurance or stick-to-itness, is a manifestation of Chesed, limitless. I'm not quitting. Gevura manifests itself in Hoid. Hoid translates as glory, but it is to give the glory to Hashem. How do I give the glory to Hashem? By restraining myself. How do I let other people make comments, other people make the joke, other people be witty and intelligent and so on? By restraining myself. If I can restrain myself, other people can have glory and so on. So we start up here in an academic, and then it manifests itself in sort of a conceptual character trait. And then it starts to manifest itself in a pragmatic, and the ultimate is in Malchus. Chesed never helped anybody. Chesed, invested in Malchus, helps people. So it's like I'm a kind person. I'm writing a book on kindness. I have a PhD in kindness. I'm writing another book on kindness, but I'm not getting that. There's no kindness in action in Chesed. This is the concept of kindness. Kindness in action is when Chesed is manifest in Malchus, and it has to go through all of these stages. So here the Alter Rebbe continues. V'sham there Haisa Hasagus Nevuasa bebechinis Pinimius. The Hainu bebechinis Pinimius the Netzach Chod Yesod Malchus. So back to this reference to Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moshe Rabbeinu, again, you can't get higher than that, and that's going to be part of the discussion. His comprehension, his prophetic understanding of godliness reached beyond the pragmatic into those lower four spheres. A way of understanding this is when we talk about a mitzvah and we say, what is the value of this mitzvah? So we tend to have two paths. One is, it's Hashem's will. Okay, that's certainly a lofty perspective, but it doesn't really have any insight. And it doesn't differentiate, which at a certain perspective is a very valuable thing. We don't differentiate. Hashem said, blow the shofar. Hashem said, or to use the analogy, Hashem said, don't wear shatnez. Then it comes to the priestly garments. Hashem says, do wear shatnez. Fine, whatever you say. Today I eat matzah. Tomorrow I can't eat matzah. Fine. Okay, so that's a level where we bypass any sense of understanding. That's one level. of understanding. Then there's another where we start to understand, well, this is how we commemorate going out of Egypt, and we go out of our own Egypts, or this is how we run a functional society. If I return lost objects, then people will return my lost objects. The world will be a kinder place. So that perspective, which is valuable as well, to have a nuanced understanding of the particulars of life all around me, is also of great value. That is what we're describing here, again, in a very rough form, certainly of something greater, is the Netzach Chod Yesod Malchus, those lower spheroids. When we say lower, we mean more externally expressive characteristics that trickle down, or that express themselves, trickle down is the wrong word, that express themselves in our human life, in our practical world. So that form of expression is where Moshe Rabbeinu was able to understand. That is the pragmatic side of the mitzvahs. Okay, so that's a statement. Now, it's a limitation on Moshe, which we may not like. And yet, we're going to even double down on that challenge. Aval, however, L'mayla, Netzach Chod Yesod Malchus, once we get higher, and again, the word higher is somehow a little misleading, at least it is to me. I mean more personally. Imagine this even in an interpersonal human relationship. Somebody says, this is what I like. So the other person might say, well, explain to me why you like that. Now, again, that can be combative. Well, why should I? You have to validate. But even if it's not, it's cooperative. I want to understand why this is meaningful to you. So the person himself may not even be able to articulate it. And even if they can articulate why this is meaningful to them, what they're able to express is a tangible, pragmatic manifestation. And there's an inarticulatable quality that, again, we are imperfect people. We didn't even know ourselves, so we may not be able to express it. But of course, Hashem knows himself. That's not the limitation here. Is not from what we would call the mashpia, being Hashem. But in our interpersonal reactions, we may not be able to express ourselves as to why something is particularly meaningful to us. I don't even know myself. I just sort of blurted out, I like it. I don't know. But if we imagine that there is a deeper level, we may not be able to articulate it, or the person may not be able to understand it, because ultimately we're two separate beings. So I can explain the pragmatic side of it, but I can't explain, or the person can't understand. That is, the student or the partner can't understand the depth of it. Again, we all want to be known, but we can't ultimately be known. That's called higher than Netzach Chod Yesod Malchus. So what we can make known is what we can express about ourselves. But L'mayla that Lo Haisa Loi Moshe Rabbeinu, and again, this isn't just meant to be a knock on Moshe, because he's sort of the ultimate level. Lo Haisa Loi Shuma Saga B'Pnimius. He did not have any understanding of the Pnimius. Remember, we talked about that. That's the essential conceptual idea. Ki'im b'bechinas acharayim d'chachma lebeshes b'bina lebeshes u'mespashetes toich pnimius d'netzach chod yesod malchus. What he could reach is the acharayim, the pragmatic side. So when I say I like it when you do this, it's because it gives me a sense of security. It's I don't know, whatever it is. Each person with their own story as to why this action is appreciated. But again, it's only an expression. We don't even know ourselves. This is why we're all in, some deep therapeutic thing to find out. It's because of some other story, whatever it is that we can all imagine. So we're saying that even when it comes to the Moshe Rabbeinu and Hashem, even Moshe Rabbeinu can only grasp the acharayim. Acharayim, again, literally translates as back, but the expressive side as to why it makes the world a better place, why it's a better mousetrap, as we talked about. And that's the Chachma as it is invested in the Bina, that is manifest into the essence of, that is the driving force behind the implementation of those characteristics as manifest in the tangible practical. Aside, Noivles Chachma, Shalamayla. And this is what we call, again, the depth of the soy, the secret, but not secret as in something I can't tell you, but the conceptual, essential idea of the trickle down of Chachma. Shalamayla, Torah, Shehi bebechinas Zot. That is the level of Zeir Anpin. Remember, Zeir Anpin is the short face. It's the level of godliness, I'm sorry, it's the level of the non-expressive. It's not manifest all the way down. And then we just had this in the parsha a few weeks ago. Moshe Rabbeinu asks Hashem, I want to see your panai, your face, but again, the word is your panemius. I want to have that level of awareness. And Hashem says, you cannot see my face. You cannot see the panemius, what I'm calling the conceptual essence. You can only see the back. You can only see the expressive. And just to play that story out for one more step, Rashi tells us that what Hashem showed Moshe was the knot of the back of tefillin on the back of his head. And again, whatever the mystical interpretation of what that means is a little outside of our purview right now. The relevant issue is that Hashem tells Moshe, you can only see the expressive side. You can only see what I asked you to do and use that as a launching pad to go backwards. Now, it doesn't say what I'm about to tell you now in the letter, but I think it might help us understand it a little bit better. We are probably all familiar with the statement in the Talmud that our patriarchs, the Avos and Imois, fulfilled all of Torah even before it was given. So they ate matzah, and they sat in the sukkah, and they even did the rabbinic commandments and so on. So of course we ask, well, why are they eating matzah? We didn't even go down into Egypt and be slaves for so long that we had to leave in such a hurry we didn't have time for the bread to rise. So why are they eating matzah for? So we explain, well, as we know, that we don't only eat matzah because our ancestors left Egypt. We eat matzah because the message of matzah is about humility and the poor man's bread and all of the lessons that we learn from matzah. So that Pesach is not, or every yontif or every mitzvah is not just about commemorating some event from a long time ago. It's about each of us being reenacting. It's all the different things that we talk about. So we know that we are supposed to eat matzah specifically on the 15th of Nisan, because that's when our ancestors left Egypt in such a hurry, we didn't have time for the bread to rise. However, our matriarchs and patriarchs, they knew that on the 15th of Nisan, they really needed to emphasize all of these other lessons, humility and hurriedness, whatever, all the different things. And how do you do that? By eating these crackers and so on. So we start from the pragmatic and work back to the conceptual. They started from the conceptual and worked down to the pragmatic. But even their awareness was, again, limited to how it manifests itself. It teaches us about humility, et cetera, et cetera. It's always going to be anchored in the illustration of, well, not illustration is the wrong word, but in the implementation side. It's always going to be anchored in the behavioral side. So Moshe Rabbeinu, top of the class. Again, it's not just about Moshe Rabbeinu specifically, but it's saying even Moshe Rabbeinu could only get to that stage above. So if we think about the conceptual as it manifests or as it trends towards the implementation, and then the implementation, we know the implementation, shake the lulav and esrog, sit in the sukkah, hear the shofar. Oh, those teach us these lessons. So hopefully we get, one step above. That's how far Moshe could go, but not beyond. Okay, so that's the idea. Now, what's the problem with that? So here we go. L'chaira yesh lahafliya. Now, this is really weird. We're ready now for the question, because this word lahafliya is really not like we often say, we requires investigation or this seemingly contradicts. It's really a strong phrase. How do we account for this? This doesn't seemingly make any sense. Harei Nemar, the pasuk says, "V'lo kam navi oid b'Yisrael kamosh," that there was never a prophet, and again, the prophet is the person who has this type of insight. It's not just about someone who Hashem chose to foretell the message of the future. And who is the greatest prophet is Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, like I was saying, it's not just about Moshe, it's about he is the absolute extreme. So Moshe Rabbeinu is the extreme. So what it's saying is a human being, no human being can see God's face and live. Not because they'll be punished, but because then we'll cease to be human. We won't have perspective. The two sons of Aaron who left this world and never came back. All of that different explanation. So the cap is the bottom four midos of as they're expressed, and then there's going to be this gap. Our ultimate mission is to pursue the knowledge of God, and you can never acquire the knowledge of God. Just like a person, right? We all want to be known, but we don't want to feel like something. I know you. There can be a certain insulting characteristic because it's I have put a complete box around the person. I want to be known, but if somebody says they know me, then I get very, I feel invaded in my life. Okay, so Moshe Rabbeinu says. So it says regarding Moshe Rabbeinu that he could reach higher, and yet the Echisig Arizal Yesh Mimenu, but we have an understanding that the Arizal did, that is Rabbi Zagluria, did have a comprehension at a level. Again, we use the word higher. That's not really, I don't know if it's the best word, more intense level, even than Moshe Rabbeinu. V'darash kama drush bebechinas pnimius afilu b'sfirus u'madregas rabba shalamai mechachim v'kesed datzilis. Because the Arizal in many of his writings expounded on issues at the level of Atzilus and loftier. So we got an insight. We sort of run our finger across the shrink wrap. Oh, now we found the tab. Now we're going to dive in. So here's our perpendicular point, which is our point of entry into the discussion. We have this statement that even Moshe Rabbeinu, and he's the uppest toppest, could not get higher than that bottom four levels of the spheres, because Hashem said, you cannot see my face. There's going to be a buffer. And yet we see that the Arizal himself did. So how could that possibly be? And we can't say, well, the Arizal could outpace Moshe Rabbeinu. That's allowed. Because no, the pasuk says expressly that there never again arose a prophet like Moshe Rabbeinu. Ipso facto, nobody could have a more intense level of awareness. So it seems that he did. Now, we have a rule of thumb in as we alluded to this before, in areas of pragmatic halacha, we have different opinions. We even have right, wrong. We have opinions that are suggested and ultimately refuted. And even sometimes in the Talmud, it says, this opinion has been rejected. Why is it still there? Because we can learn something from it and not to make the same mistake and go down that path, and etc. In the area of Hasidus, we don't ever have real dispute. We have differing perspectives, but there's not like right, wrong. There's a variety of perspectives and understandings. We don't have a right, wrong. It all depends on what we're talking about. So we're going to pursue our strategy for understanding why we appear to have this contradiction that says that Moshe Rabbeinu reached a level and no one could get greater, and then we say that the Arizal did, is not that they're not in the same genre. There's two different perspectives as to what we're talking about. Was it visual, as in a prophecy, like God said, you cannot, and here's the key word, see my face, you can only see my back? Or was it through the conceptual intellectual? Now, we understand this as well. We could discuss a mechanical item, and you could really get a comprehension, but there's nothing like seeing it. When you see it, now you really understand it. But when you just discuss it, you could, in a way, have a greater understanding than when you see it. In fact, this is often explained why we can't see Hashem, because when we see something, we tend to misinterpret that we now know what it is. I see it, I know what it is. I don't really understand it. I just know how it works. I mean, think about our world with technology. We know how to operate it, and we see the product, but do we really understand how it works? Do we have a true comprehension of how it works? Often not. So when we talk about understanding and seeing, the two are very different. And that's going to really be the key. Because again, that pasuk says that Moshe said, "V'reisi, I could see." Or God says, I'm sorry, to Moshe, you can only see. And we're going to talk about the difference between seeing and conceptualizing. So here we go. Ache Inyan who pasha to move in the chol. So the difference is understood and obvious. Well, I guess we don't have to keep reading. Sheyesh hefresh gadol ben asagas chachmei emes kerashbi v'arizal. That the difference is in the mechanism of perception, and there's fundamental difference between how what he describes here as the scholars of truth, like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the Arizal. Now, what does it mean, the scholars of truth, as opposed to the scholars of falseness? Meaning they're pursuing it in an academic manner. We had this recently, where we talk about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, him of the dwelling in the cave. So clearly, when he and his son Rabbi Lezer were in the cave for what turned out to be a total of 13 years, they're not learning Torah in a pragmatic sense, right? They're not even doing mitzvahs. I don't know that they got a lulav and esrog while they were in the cave. They just were there for a conceptual idea of what a lulav and esrog are. They don't know, they're not there to see it tangibly and pragmatically, just conceptually what it is. So they are considered scholars of truth, meaning truth not as opposed to falseness, but they're intellectually or academically pursuing the concept of Hashem. Shia sagas chachma v'das, which is a grasping through the intellect and the awareness. Ubein hasagas Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom b'shar neviim. In contrast to Moshe and prophets, the nevuah hamechuna b'kosu b'shem ria mamash, v'reisi es achurai v'eres Hashem v'yera lav Hashem. That Moshe and all the prophets saw Hashem. So it's the difference between knowing that something is, that's through chachma, and what something is, which is through vision. So that what? On my notes, it's really good. I underlined the T and the W. Pretty proud of myself on that. It's the difference between that and what. So again, we can discuss some mechanical idea and really, really understand it. And then when you see it, so we really, really understand it, but we don't see it, and they see it and maybe don't really, really understand it. And that's essentially the answer to our question, which we will explore clearly in the rest of this letter. Moshe saw it, but maybe didn't have the understanding, and they understood it, but didn't see it. He could see to that degree. You see what I mean? I mean, we use these terms even in English interchangeably, and here we're really parsing them out, the difference between seeing and knowing. And here's the Alter Rebbe lists off all of these different quotes that describe prophecy as visual. Like it says, you saw my back, I saw Hashem, God appeared to him, right? Avraham Avinu, we talked about that before. These are all forms of visual. And again, these are also, not that they saw it like we had an optical visual experience, like we can see my hand in front of my face, but it's the idea. Again, we use this in English as well. You see what I mean? We use that kind of terminology. Because Malcolm, nevertheless, Hanim Shal Tzarech Liyas Daimel L'Mashal. And again, even though the visual is only an analogy, but it's not just a random analogy, it's got some connection. Kukatargum, like the Targum, which is Onkelos says, V'yerulav Hashem, God appeared to him, and he translates that Vizgal Yalei v'chulu. God made himself known. God expressed himself. Shehu b'chinas his galish and negala elav hanelam baruch hu b'chinas his galis. That is, that God revealed himself in this way of revelation. Mashen came basagas chachmei emesh le'nigla le'em avaya hanelam baruch hu b'chinas his galis. Rak shein masigim talumas chacham hanelam. In contrast, when it says that they understood Hashem, so again, it wasn't revealed to them something that was hidden in a manner that was clear. It was simply that they comprehended that which is hidden away. Hanelam benelam umufla mehem, and is completely separated from them. Amru chacham adif minavi, and that's why we have a statement that says that a scholar is, and the word is sort of deeper than a prophet, because the prophet can only know of something, while the scholar can know about much greater levels, even though the prophet can see, but he can't necessarily know it. Like so many things that we see, but we don't really understand how they work. Another analogy to separate out between the prophet and the scholar is like the difference between the child and the student. A child is intuitively their parent. They have an intuitive understanding of their parent. They are intuitively their parent. A scholar can understand a person to a greater degree sometimes than the child can. He can know the person far deeper. We can know somebody from history more than the people at that time knew. I mean, look, in many ways, we literally, readers of Torah, know more about what was going on than the average Jew, right? If you're just an average guy and you're a slave in Egypt, you don't know what's going on in these inner conversations between Moshe and Hashem, between Moshe and Paro, Moshe and Aaron. You don't know these things. You're just a guy. Time to leave. And they go. But their experience is far greater. So if we could imagine, what would it be like if I lived in the times of Yetzias Mitzrayim, or Lahavdil, the Civil War, I would be much less intellectually aware and yet much more experientially aligned, because I would really be there and feel it and smell it and so on. So again, the scholar, the academic, can have a far deeper understanding than the prophet, who can only see up to a certain level. Because since it is having to manifest through these spheres, so the Navi, the prophet, can only receive the message of that more pragmatic illustration. So I can describe to you what an apple tastes like. Then when you taste the apple, now you know. Now it's true that the botanist understands apples far better. But if he's never tasted an apple, it's only an academic understanding. And again, this is true of all the prophets. That's the point. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, in all the stages. And all these levels cannot be manifest in these spheres. That's why they can't be, those what we call higher or deeper levels, cannot be manifest in the spheres, and therefore they're not accessible to the prophet. Again, only, and I use that term, in heavy quotes, these lesser levels of Netzach Chod Yesod, which are the illustration of Chesed. That is, Chesed is limitless. Netzach is endurance, like I'm not quitting. Gavura is the concept of self-restraint. Hoid is when I let someone else go ahead of me. Shehein hen yerdis tamid u'maskalos mamashpil hamakabel b'chinas moichin b'chayis yidul yedichi. Excuse me. That these are expressed from the giver, in this case Hashem, to the recipient, which is us, in this level of, again, an academic awareness. It's always, again, an academic awareness, as we understand. That again, through the Netzach Chod Yesod and then into Malchus, that is the implementation of the character traits. So a person says, I mean, we hear this, in our modern society, just to try to bring it into a practical example. A person says, I'm a good person. Okay, so everyone's a good person in their essence. The question isn't whether or not, who's a bad person? Well, he did bad things. Well, you do bad things. Yeah, but I'm a good person. Maybe he's also a good person. And it's not even, we were not even disputing it. The question is, how far down? I mean, everybody knows you should be kind and fair and eat right and exercise and vote in every election and so on. That's the conceptual. Then it comes into my character. Then the question is, how far down does it make it? How far down does, like I was using the analogy before, does the vision of the CEO make it, or the king, down to the soldier? So that soldier who's standing out there on Hill 474 all by himself and has no awareness of the broader military plan and doesn't understand, but he's living the king's life. Now, the guys were sitting there with the king and strategizing. They see the king and so on, but they're not living the king's life. They're not out there. You think about in the chess game, the pawn is the least valuable, but it's the line of protection and so on. So there's two levels. There is the pragmatic implementation, and then there is the conceptual idea. So the conceptual understands it. The advisor understands the whole battle plan, the whole vision of the war. And the pawn, the simple soldier standing on a hill, he is living it, even if he doesn't have that degree of understanding. That this concept of Netzach Chod Yesod is manifest to give it life. And it brings it down into all of those levels. And that's what the Navi has. He has access to and that's why he foretells the future. Not just, chas v'shalom, like it's some sort of trick. But the idea is he is telling you a level that is otherwise inaccessible, that has a pragmatic implementation. What's the word I'm looking for? Not implementation, but whatever, impact. Because that's the role of the prophet. He's not there to teach you academics. He's there to tell you what to do. He has insight into something outside of himself or outside of human academics. That's the level that can be expressed to the Navi, because the role of the Navi is to teach us something practical that has a practical consequence. There's a word there that I can't think of. It has a practical consequence that is manifest. So since the Navi is focused on the pragmatic, his level of nevuah gives us an insight that has, again, application in the physical, whereas the Chacham can conceptually reach to a level even outside of it. All right, stop here.